Welcome to episode 2 of Building a Beautiful Town in the game Medieval Dynasty. In this episode, we are the town planner, so we're looking at how to plan out a town, give it a natural and organic looking layout, and I'm going to show you some tips along the way as well. In episode 1, we looked at 6 of the best locations to build on in the Oxbow, and then we put it to a vote on which of those 6 locations you wanted the rest of the series to be based on. And the majority of you voted for the mountain, with the lake being close in second, but we chose the mountain. Now, the mountain is quite a difficult place to build. There's not a lot of level land, there's loads of trees, there's loads of rocks, so finding an actual spot to build on is quite difficult. So we're going to be spreading out the town across a few different areas in the mountain, and then we're just going to link them all together with roads. There's also not a lot of natural resources in this area, so clay pits, water, that kind of thing. So finding a focal point to build around is quite challenging, but we have got the amazing views to look out. So yeah, there's some interesting spots to go for as well. Now, I was trying to figure out the best way to do this episode because I know a lot of you wanted me to show you how I go literally from beginning to end, but I started doing that and the video was going to turn out to be like a week long, so it just wasn't practical. So instead what I've done is put together 10 of my top tips for planning out your town. Some of them you may already know, some of them you may not. Hopefully there's something there for everyone, but on some of the tips I will be diving deeper into exactly how I plan things out. So let's get right into it with tip number 1, which is don't clear the area. And what do I mean by that? I mean exactly what I'm doing right now, which is chopping down all the trees, getting rid of all the bushes, so I've got a nice clear open space. Might seem like a good idea because you can see exactly where you've got to build, but actually it's short-term gain, long-term pain, because a lot of these things are irreversible, so once you've done them you can't get them back. So it might be really tempting, it might seem like a really good idea because you end up with your piece of land looking like this. What you've actually done is stripped away all the character of that piece of land. So those bushes you could have incorporated into a garden, you could have built a focal point around one of the trees. You might end up not using any of those, but at least leave yourself with that option and chop them down and get rid of them individually as and when you decide that you don't want them. Now, what you can do if you do want to get a bit of a better view of your land, because it is a good idea, is what I'm doing right now, which is equipping your axe, chopping down a tree, chopping it into logs. You can collect those logs and just leave it at that. If you leave the stump in, the tree is going to grow back after 2 years' time, so it might be a bit of a wait, but at least you know that it's definitely coming back. However, if you dig the stump out like this, that tree is gone permanently, it's not growing back. So the only way you're going to get that back is if you reload a save, by which point it might be too late before you realise your mistake, you might be too far into the save game, you might have done too much work, and yeah, it's not possible. Sometimes what I might do though, if I do want to get that initial clear look of exactly where everything can go, is save the game, chop all the trees down, clear the area, have a good look around, place some buildings down just as a test to see where things can go, and then reload the save. That way I know exactly which trees can stay, which trees can go, and I've got a much better idea of the layout of that area. Now, thinking along those lines is tip number 2, which is plan carefully. Now you can see what I'm doing here, which is getting a foundation of a house, and you can see exactly where I want to put it. There's a bush. Now if I put that foundation down, the bush goes, and you'll be forgiven for thinking maybe if I demolish the foundation again, the bush might return instantly, or it might be the same as the trees and it might come back after 2 years, but they don't come back. Once they've gone, they're gone. So just be careful when you're putting foundations of buildings down. It's not just building foundations that this affects, it also happens to piers and walkways. So again, if you put that down, the bush is gone. The bush at the end, that's going to go as well. And it doesn't matter if we just put the foundation down, it doesn't matter if we build the platform and then demolish it, there's no way that we're going to get that bush back. So again, just be really careful when you're putting things down. And you guessed it, same thing happens with roads. So if we put this road down here, straight through the middle of the bush, once it's down, the bush goes. But you can use this to your advantage. So if you are trying to clear an area, roads is one of the best things that you can put down to clear an area really quickly, and then you can demolish it and everything won't come back. So you can use that to your advantage. Now there is one thing that you can put down that isn't going to get rid of bushes and stones and things like that, which is fences. So you can see I've selected this fence here. I'm going to place it straight through the middle of the bush, put the schematic down, and it's not going anywhere. Even if I build it, the bush is still staying as well. Demolish it as well, still staying. So that's quite handy to know, but that is one of the only things that you can do that's not going to destroy everything in its path. Tip number 3 is persevere. And what I mean by this is when you're putting a building down, you might be in a spot where you think there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to get a foundation down here. But keep rotating the building, keep moving around, cover literally every single angle and just persevere. Because the amount of times that I've been in an area where I think there's no way I'm going to be able to get a house down here, all of a sudden you rotate it and bam, get that flash of green and you can put something down. And doing this, you might find some really unique spots that you didn't think you could actually build in, that you can build in, like this spot, which has an amazing view. Tip number 4 is use photo mode. And what I mean by that is you might be trying to put a house foundation down, but there might be bushes in the way, and you might not be too sure if this is exactly where you want this building to be. So what you can do is leave the foundation as it is like that, go into the pause menu, down to photo mode, and then once you're in your photo mode, for me it's triangle to enter camera mode. Once you're in camera mode, you can then move the camera around, give yourself a good 360 view of what that building looks like there. Obviously it's not built, so it's not ideal, but it gives you a much better impression of what that building looks like than you get in third person mode. If you think you're happy with where this building is or not, you can exit photo mode, back into the game, and you can then either put that building down or cancel it. This way you can see what the building's going to look like there without having to sacrifice bushes that you may want to keep otherwise if the building doesn't look right there. Tip number 5 is destroy mode is your friend. Sometimes you might be putting a road down and it might not be 100% clear where it is because it might blend in with the ground. You might be trying to line up another path with it, you might be trying to attach a building to the path, and yeah, it's just not clear. So with your hammer equipped, go into destroy mode, and what that does is highlights where the path is exactly, either in red or white. And what you can do is stay in destroy mode, put some road down, and it will still let you put those roads down in destroy mode. So you can see exactly where you're building, exactly where the other path that you're trying to match it up with is, and yeah, it just makes things a lot easier. And you can use the same technique with fields. So if you go into buildings, farming, and then fields, what you can do is lay a strip of field down and then basically use that as a straight line or a ruler. Once you put it down, those stakes in the ground that mark out where the field are can sometimes blend in with the ground and it's not too easy to see. So again, go into destroy mode with your hammer and that is going to shine it up bright red. Then what you can do is you can either line up houses, line up fences perfectly straight, and because you can only place fields in north, east, south or west, you can then use the compass at the top of your screen to perfectly line things up. Now that's not exactly what I'm doing in this video here because I wasn't too bothered about getting it perfectly straight, but you just need to make sure that arrow is pointing in the exact direction where you want it, and then yeah, you can use it to perfectly line things up. And you can see there, even without doing that, I've got a pretty straight row of houses. Then we just need to destroy the field and you can see everything's in a straight line. And speaking of straight lines, tip number 6 is don't build in grids. And what do I mean by that? I mean your classic American or modern city systems where everything's built in perfectly straight lines, perfect grids. It sticks out like a sore thumb, especially in a medieval setting. This isn't how medieval towns were laid out. I'm sure maybe a few of them were, but mostly medieval towns and villages were built around convenience of local resources. So they would follow the lay of the land along the banks of rivers or streams or something like that. This way you get a much more organic and natural looking town rather than straight lines. If you're going for something functional that's easy to navigate, then sure, go for blocks. But in terms of good looking natural towns, try and avoid them where you can. So instead what we want to try and do is let the natural features of the landscape dictate to us where we build, rather than us dictating to it where we build. So for example, try and find little higher spots of ground, somewhere with a nice view like this, somewhere where it makes sense that you would put your house if you were trying to build here. You'd want the best spot possible, somewhere where there's a nice view, rather than just somewhere in the middle of a grid. This is going to help your town to have a much more organic feel. So over here we can see we've got all these berry bushes, which is a nice little spot. And going back to not getting rid of all the trees, again, keeping the trees is going to dictate to us where we can build and where we can't build. And that's going to help us build less predictably and in a more organic kind of way. So again, we've put that house down over there, so we're going to search for somewhere that we think a house might fit. So we can nestle one just in between these trees. And yeah, we've stopped ourselves from building in straight lines just by using the natural features of the landscape to dictate to us to where we want to build. And if we take a step back, we can see that, yeah, we haven't built in a grid, we've built completely randomly, but in an organic and logical kind of way. And we're going to use this exact same principle when we're putting down roads. So this time, again, we're going to let the natural features of the landscape dictate to us where we put the road. We're going to try and find the most level pieces of ground and follow the natural lay of the land. We're also going to be building in short, sharp bursts, so not long straight lines. This is going to help to add a more organic curve to the path, and that's going to help to give it a much more natural look. Another thing that we're going to do is try to avoid rocks and bushes, so we can build close to them so they don't get deleted, but again, we want to try to avoid those kind of things and keep them in place. We're also going to use trees as sort of gateways to aim for, rather than sort of just making a beeline straight for the next building in a straight line. We're also not going to think too far ahead, so we're just going to, again, build in short little bursts and try and look forward and see a kind of logical route for us to go. So again, we're going to go and use the trees as a little gateway, try and stay away from the bushes as much as possible so they don't get deleted, but also use them as a guide to sort of naturally curve the path around it. Another little tree gateway to go for, and then we're going to join it back up with the original start of the path. Once that's connected, we can then again step back and we can see that we've built a much more natural looking path system rather than just a big square block of paths. Moving on to tip number 7, which is plan homesteads. And what I mean by this is we want to try and make every house self-sufficient. We also want to give it a production building or an extraction building, as if that's their main focus of work. So here we're in the middle of the woods, so I've given this house a woodshed because that makes logical sense. We also want to give each house some field plots so they can have a vegetable garden. This is pretty much what would have happened in medieval times. Most houses would have had their own vegetable garden so they can grow their own veg. Can't obviously just nip down to the supermarket, so that's what I mean when we want to make homesteads. Every single house is self-sufficient, they can grow their own food. It also just helps to give them a bit more character. So over this side we're near the berry bushes again, so it makes sense to put a herbalist hut there. So again, just use the natural features of the landscape to kind of dictate which buildings go where. And again, we're going to give this house a little vegetable patch, so this house is self-sufficient as well. And then we give ourselves plenty of room, so later on when we come to decorating, we can fill in the gaps and we can put in fences and things like that. This house up here, we've got a little bit more space, so maybe we can have a little hen house, have chickens running around the garden. Again, it wouldn't have been unusual for houses to have their own chickens and things like that, so try and think logically when you're putting houses down like this. Again, little vegetable garden, and we can fence that off again later on, and again fill it in with decorations so the house looks more lived in basically. The vegetable gardens don't need to be massive, only sort of 2x4, 2x3, 2x2, just enough that we can grow a variety of different things. Linking into this is tip number 8, which is plan quarters. So we're on a different part of the mountain up here. We were building further down the mountain before, and that area was more focused on extraction. So this section is going to be a little bit more about production. Now, because the space is quite limited, I'm not going to put every single production building up here, but it's just to sort of showcase, give you an example of what I'm talking about. So up here, it's going to be like a mini kind of ranch. We've got a stable block, but I'm also going to put a smithy up here as well. And there's a couple little areas nearby and that's where I'm going to put the other production buildings. So everything's kind of like sectioned off into different areas. It's going to help your town feel a bit more realistic rather than just everything lumped into one space. If you're building in sort of a more compact area, like a town centre, you can do the same kind of thing. Quarter off the town centre, so you've got all your production buildings in one area, all of your extraction buildings in another area, or maybe even build your extraction buildings outside of the town centre. Try and make things look and feel a little bit more logical. Now I wanted to try in at least one section of this video to try and dive deeper into my process, exactly how I plan things. So I thought this was a good opportunity to try and showcase this a little bit. So obviously we're just finishing off this area up on top of the hill, but in my head I'm now thinking about a farming quarter. So we're going to go further down the mountain and then we're going to plan that area out, and I'll go through in a bit more detail from start to finish how I do that. So down on the mountain we've got a nice flat open area ahead of us, and that's where I'm going to plan this farming quarter. We've got a lot of open space, so we can do some fields, we can also do some cattle and things like that. So to start things off, I spotted these two trees which were pretty much the exact width of a gate, so this is going to make a nice little entrance for the farm. Adding the log gateway is going to emphasise that this is actually the entrance. Now the farming quarter, again trying to think logically, it would make sense that it has its own farmhouse, so we'll put a little house just dedicated to this area. And then what I'm going to do is going to start to put some animal husbandry buildings down, but I'm going to split them up into different types that make sense. So the pigs and the chickens are going to go here, and then we're going to put the cows and the sheep further away. So it's going to section things off. Now what I usually like to do but can't do here is link the animal husbandry buildings up with natural resources. So for example, if I've got a small patch of water, then I might try and put the geese on there so it's got a nice little goose pond. If there's more clay in the area, then I can use that to make a pigsty out of. Obviously pigs, mud go hand in hand. Clay looks a lot like mud, so I think that looks really effective. So just try and match those kind of things together so it looks a little bit more realistic. Once I've done that section, I'm then going to start thinking about the next section. So I'm going to use fields to split that all up. And when we're doing fields, what I like to do is create smaller, thinner strips of fields. So it just means you can add a variety of different crops to each field. Just makes things easier to manage, but also just from an aesthetic point of view, it looks quite nice. So here, because we really haven't got a lot of space, I'm just going to do a 2 wide field, 2 together, and then I'm going to split that in the middle, and then we're going to have a little path that leads through the middle of these. Having this little path is going to be a natural sort of course for the path to go and lead on to the next section. But it also gives us 4 different types of fields, so we can have a variety of different crops growing at the same time. And in between those fields, later on, we're going to add some fences, so it looks a little bit more sectioned off as well. Now again, the same with the roads as we did before. We're going to use the natural features of the landscape to dictate where we put the paths. So I'm going to try and avoid hitting this bush, so we can have the entrance with a little bush and a tree outside of it. And then once we go inside, again, short, small bursts of path to make it curved and leading up to the house. And then we're going to link up the next section of fields. So we're going to, again, try and avoid this bush as much as I can so it doesn't get deleted. And then link onto the next section of field. So again, little path straight down the middle, and that's going to just have a nice sort of natural course to go through. And at the end of this, I'm going to use a barn to sort of mark the next section of farming, and it also makes a nice little entranceway as well. Now in this area, we're going to have sort of a grazing area. So if we can, we're going to try and get a cowshed. And again, to our previous tip, we've just got to persevere a bit. Maybe it won't happen, but we're just going to try and rotate as much as we can, and hopefully we get a bit of green. There we go. So we've got a cattle building there, and linking similar sort of animals together, we're going to add a fold to the mix as well. We're going to put this side, so again it kind of creates a natural barrier to the rest of the section. We're going to try and make it look as natural as possible. After I've done that, I'm then going to start building a fence around this area. And similarly with paths, again I want to build in short sharp bursts rather than big straight lines, and I'm kind of going to use the natural flow of the land to dictate where the path goes. So here you can see I'm just following that right at the edge of the land before it gets too steep, and then I'm going to link it up to the edge of the cowshed. And again, that's just going to create a natural sort of fence line. Same thing on this side. I'm just going to link up these two buildings here. This time it's fine to use a little straight section. And again, that's just going to show the different sections of the farm that we've got going. Now, I would usually put a little bit more thought into this, but just for the purpose of the video, I'm just putting the fence down where it makes sense immediately. And again, just following the natural flow of the land, and then I'm going to link it back up to the edge of the cowshed down here. And then once we've sectioned this off, we've left ourselves loads of space so we can fill it in with decorations later, like haystacks and things like that. And then we're just going to add a farm shed to this area as well. Again, we're just thinking logically about where things would go. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to start fencing off this section of the farm. And because I used stone fence before, I'm going to use a different variety of fence just to mix things up. So this one's wattle fence, and again, just using natural features like a tree as a fence post basically to dictate where the fence goes. In another section of the series, I'm going to show you what I call layering, and this is best shown with fences. It's basically using different fence types lined up against each other, and it just creates a more sort of visual effect. And again, we're going to use the tree as a natural sort of fence post, and then we'll start on the other side. As this is where the farmhouse is, we want to make sure that the farmhouse has got somewhat of a garden, so we're going to incorporate these bushes into that as well. So again, not building in straight lines, but just using the bushes as a natural guide. Then we'll find a natural part of the stone wall to start with the wattle fence, and we'll link that back up to where we started. Now obviously I said about straight lines and trying to avoid them, but it's absolutely fine to use them where it makes sense. So the field is a straight line, can't really get away from that, so we're going to use a straight stone fence just to line the edge of this field. Again, just helps section off this area. And that's the farm pretty much laid out. Now, that would usually take me a lot longer. Like I said, I've just quickly done that. Usually it would involve me running around back and forth, just thinking a lot, but I've just tried to do that quickly just to give you an idea of my thought process. So I hope that's helped. Moving on to tip number 9, which is plan focal points. And what I mean by this is something to build your section around. So it might be something like this, which we did earlier, which is a load of berry bushes. It's just an interesting feature to build around. So just to make more of a feature of it, all I'm going to do is build a fence along the path, and that's going to incorporate all the bush, and it's going to, both from a practical point of view, it's going to help protect those resources if we're looking at it from a realistic sort of angle, but also from an aesthetic point of view, it's going to make a much better feature out of it. So what we can do later on, once we go into more like decoration, we can make a gap in the fence, we can put a gate in, and then inside we could put some benches, maybe some poppy fields and things like that to make it look a little bit nicer. And that way we're turning what would normally just be a normal part of the landscape into something much more of a feature and incorporating it into our towns. Just simply putting a fence around it just makes it look much more defined and much more like an actual feature of the town. Once we've linked that fence up, we can take a step back, and again, already, even without building it, we can see the beginnings of sort of like a park or something like that. Now, it might be that you're building in an area that really doesn't have much going for it in terms of it might just be a flat open space like this without any trees or bushes or anything kind of like that. So what we can do is create our own focal points. So all I've done here is gone into farming, buildings, and I've just put a single plot of orchard down. I've grubbed it up, and then I'm just going to plant a single pear tree. And in a few years' time, that will mature, and that then becomes a feature. And then to turn it into a more defined feature, what we can then do is build a fence around it. And to help us with that, again, if we go into destroy mode, you can see exactly where the edges of the orchard is, so we can build the fence around it. Then I'm building a circle fence around it. Obviously you can build a square, whatever suits you best, but I think circular sort of pattern here would suit it a little bit better. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but something just resembles a circle. No one's really going to notice, doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. Once we've done that, we can then build a road around it, and again, just short bursts of path just to help add a little bit of curve to it rather than just a square. That's going to help it look a little bit more decorative. Once we've linked that up, we can then think about what we're going to put around this focal point. So something that's just easy to do is just some houses. So even just a house on three sides of it just means that the houses have got a reason to be there and something nice to sort of look out onto. If we had a bit more space, we could build the houses a little bit further back, give them a front garden, maybe make the central tree more of a park, add some poppy fields into it. For the purpose of this video, this is more just an example for you to go off and build your own ideas on top of it. So I just mentioned poppy fields, so I'll just show you what I mean by that. If you go into buildings, farming, and field, we're going to put a 2x2 plot field down, and then in the spring what we can do is compost that, plant poppy seeds, so in the summer poppies pop up and then it kind of looks like a little flower border. Again, if we go into destroy mode, we can see exactly where the field is, and then we can build our fence around it. This time I'm building a stone fence around it just to mix things up, but obviously you can build whatever you like. And then the same principle applies here. Once we're done, you could build houses around it, or maybe you could just have it as a park or something like that. So yeah, you can do whatever you like with it. Then on to the final tip number 10, which is to build a town square. So obviously most medieval towns would have had a town square, which would have incorporated a tavern, a market, things like that. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we can put a tavern down here, and then we can place features around it just to make a little bit of a town square. Now you can go as full on as you want with this. You can see in this town square that I did in Czechoslovakia, I went all out and made it really compact and had loads of buildings around it, so it really did feel like a town square. But you can do whatever you like with it. If you want to do a more spread out version like I'm doing here, then that's absolutely fine as well. But I'd say one of the key things that you want in your town square is a little market area. So obviously we can make these little market stalls, And again, you can go as wild as you want with this. You can make it really heavy detail. Again, like you can see in this market I did in Okradovia, where I went all out and went super detailed. Really big market area. It's just going to depend on how much space you've got and how much patience you've got, because decorating like this takes a lot of patience, trust me. Sometimes you don't need to go all out to make something look good. The smaller it is, the more easy it is to get really into the detail. So for here, we might just do 3 market stalls, but again, that's going to make it a lot easier when it comes to decorating. And again, like we did before with the focal point, you can create your own. So we might want to place a single orchard plot down here and have a tree just right outside the tavern entrance. Again, it's just a little features here and there that are just going to make it pop a little bit. Same as before as well, we can use individual poppy fields to create little flower borders. And just to emphasize it a little bit more, you can also put fences around it. Low plank fence looks really good as a little flower border, but it's kind of up to you, just kind of what visual style you want to go for. And then later on, when we get into decorating, we can start putting benches down, bell towers, which again is just going to make it a bit more feature rich. But then we just want to link everything up with roads, and again, same principles before, just a short sharp bursts of paths just to create that curve, and then we're just going to work our way around the features that we've got on place already, and just linking all the buildings together. And that is about it. They are my 10 top tips for planning and laying out your towns. Hopefully that's been really helpful for you and given some ideas. If you have any suggestions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comments. I always respond to everyone. So yeah, feel free to put a comment down if you like it or dislike it or want to go into something in a bit more depth. In the next episode, episode 3, we are looking at building your town. So again, another top 10 tips from me for building your town. If you don't want to miss out on the next episode, make sure you subscribe. And as I say, if you have any comments, just drop them in the comment section. I'll always get back to you. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in episode 3.